A very good evening and welcome to this edition of the Fourth Estate. Charles Mwangu Shampagi, and we are having this Fourth Estate after the Uganda Cranes was knocked out of the last 16 in the Africa Cup of Nations finals going on, Africa Cup of Nations tournament going on in Egypt. When we last had a discussion, we were all praised of the Uganda Cranes, but we didn't know that they would be striking, demanding for their allowances. That happened, and we were knocked out of the next stage to which we had qualified. We'll discuss that only briefly, but we understand for now, those of you who have been watching, Madagascar has qualified after beating the Democratic Republic of Congo in penalty shootouts. We'll discuss a little bit of the Uganda Cranes. We are returning with what is being seen as one of the most controversial pieces of legislation Parliament has passed recently, which is the Landlord Tenant Bill. The Landlord and Tenant Bill 2018, which was passed by Parliament. There's been a lot of discussion since the last time we had a discussion about that here over what government's intention actually was. Landlords or property owners have been coming up and protesting and saying this is going to kill the property market. Now, Uganda has a deficit of about 1.7 million units required, I think, for residents. And this number grows by 600,000 every single year. What is being done to close that gap? Does a bill like this help to close that gap? A lot of property owners have been apprehensive, anxious. I saw a commentary by the country head of Knight Frank saying this wasn't well thought through. A tenants association, a landlords association also gave a press conference to complain. We'll discuss a little bit of that. The drama around Uganda Telecom continues to this day. Now the president has instructed Justice and Constitutional Affairs Minister Kahindo Tafire to take charge, and he wrote and asked all reports must, he must be briefed so that he can brief Parliament. But President Museveni said any decision on an investor into Uganda Telecoms must be approved by Cabinet, and says Uganda Telecoms is of a strategic nature and government can't afford to lose it. To discuss those and others with me tonight, I have, let me start with the Minister of State for Housing, the Honorable Chris Baryomunse. Dr. Chris Baryomunse, very nice to have you.
Thank you very much, Charles, and good evening, viewers.
Dr. Baryomunse, back here. Thank you. It's been a very long time since we last had you here.
Thank you.
Dr. Baryomunse also represents Chinchizi East constituency in Parliament, and he is the acting Minister of Information.
Yes.
Very nice to have you.
And the National Guidance.
National Guidance. So, I don't know what the Department for National Guidance does or how it guides the nation. We'll discuss that.
I will start by guiding you.
We'll have a discussion about that when the time is due. Yeah. We have Kenneth Anderson Lukwago. Kenneth is a producer with Radio 1. Very nice to have you, Kenneth.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and good evening to the viewers.
We have Dictor Simwe. Dictor Simwe is a journalist and writes for the East African newspaper. Dictor, very nice to have you.
Thank you so much, Charles. Good evening, viewers.
And last but not least, we have Jeff Mbanga. His title is now a little bit deeper. He's director at Deep Earth, a media communications firm under the Observer, and business editor at the Observer. Yes. Is that correct? Very nice to have you.
Thank you so much, Charles. Good to be back.
Let's start with very quick comments, since people are in this football mode. The Uganda Cranes, who saw this coming, that would enter the last 16 and only make brief appearance and walk out? But the most important thing is the fights over money. Why do they plague Ugandan sports? And especially where you look at so much potential that the Uganda Cranes has demonstrated, that the potential we have, the talent we have, the spirit we have, it's only a few things that fail us. Jeff, let me start with you.
I mean, it's a common African issue that when you reach a certain stage, I mean, it's the best time to demand for your dues. So I think I would have to blame FUF on this. They should never have gotten themselves in this kind of situation. The issue of allowances, coming up. So I think all the things should be clear right from the start, that you know what, these are your allowances, you'll get them. And that has always been the issue. We had a similar situation, I think, in around 2008, 2009, when we were almost qualifying for the Cup of Nations. And I think the president offered, I think, 50 million shillings to the Cranes camp. And our football captain at the time, Ibra Sekaja, so we're told, was, I think, seen in town a day to the match, going to State House to pick the money, because they just couldn't trust the federation to handle the monies
to pick the money and deliver it.
pick them and deliver it. So the issue of money kind of disorganizes us. And actually, I think we were playing Kenya or Zambia in our final match. Kenya, I think.
Yeah.
And I think we had drawn in Nairobi and
It was Kampala.
we had drawn in we had drawn in Nairobi,
Yes.
I think, and then the return leg was in Kampala. And I mean, Nambola is a fortress, and we thought we'd all win that game, and we actually failed to win that game, and we failed to make it to the Cup of Nations. So the issue of money tends to disorganize our football camp, and I'm not surprised we got ourselves in the kind of mess that we are seeing right now.
Victor, the boys playing in for the Cranes did vindicate themselves in terms of talent and everything else, apart from where the money comes in. And of course, we're having this discussion when the coach who has taken us to this level has mutually agreed with FUFA to move on.
Like I said when I was last here, the issue of money, we need to do more than depend on government, but we also need an accountable FUFA. Because right now, the problem is the Uganda Cranes at the level they were playing at, they were among the least paid teams. And that in itself is a problem. It opens the players to so many other problems. Possibility of being corrupted, and so on and so forth. So one of the things is that we need money for our football and even other games, and that's the one thing that needs to be done, because that also explains why our coach has left, because compared to other places he'll be paid much better. So that's one. Two, as Ugandans, we need to participate. We need to go watch games, inject money in our football if we are going to go anywhere, because then you have enough resources. But also we need government to make sure the FUFA and all the other government institutions are being accountable, because that's also, you can put as much money as you can, but if it's being stolen, then you have problems. So that's the other.
Kenneth, I thought that for once we're going to have a FUFA leadership that doesn't get itself entangled in money issues. And I thought Magogo had done something, because I was having a chat with colleagues who cover sports more than I do, who follow sports more than I do, who cover it for our media houses. And they were saying, you see, Magogo has been so successful taking the Uganda Cranes to the Africa Cup of Nations twice, back to back. And we're making so much good progress because the Cranes performed so well in the group stages that we're expecting it would go on. And then all of a sudden, bang, money issues. And the argument is, what I have heard is President Museveni gave money to the Uganda Cranes. The managers of FUFA passed on that money to the players. The only difference is they thought the players would be satisfied and stop their demands at that. But they also made promises. If you cross from the group stages into the qualifying grounds, into the qualifying grounds, which is a group of 16, I mean the last 16, and then quarterfinals and semifinals, you'll earn a certain bonus for every stage, next stage you move to. I think the other promises was on a number of goals scored by individual players and by the team. Now, all of a sudden, the team is performing and beating the expectations. You know, you offer a bet hoping that people will fail to pass that stage, and then they pass the stage, and you don't know how to proceed. I thought Magogo had gone beyond that.
Well, Magogo has been part of FUFA for quite some time. So if you're looking at what happened in the past, perhaps it's very difficult to actually cut him off from what happened in the past. If you talk to some people who have followed closely sports in Uganda, they will tell you the maneuvers that happen in the Federation of Uganda Football, and you'll be able to understand that from a bigger perspective, it's actually a governance problem, like the one that continues to disturb us as a country, because you have things that are always done behind the curtain. There's lack of transparency. They go to State House, they get money, which also I think is a problem, because I think government should be able to adequately prepare for a team like the Cranes, because we knew for a long time ago that they had qualified, they were going to the African Cup of Nations. Even in the past budget, there should have been an adequate provision for the Cranes, so that we do not look at a situation where we are begging and looking for money at the last minute. But also, there are some sources that will tell you that what actually happened the moment we qualified for the second round. It was like an agreement within the camp with all the officials that this is the time to up our game. So probably it was also a tactic. Those who follow it actually say it was a tactic to actually reach out for more money. Because FIFA said in its statement that the players were demanding what was beyond the code of conduct they had signed. So one would wonder why that would suddenly happen. But there are some sports journalists who were actually in Cairo. The ones that would tell you inside sources were actually saying that it was a sort of an agreement as an entire group, that since we have made it to this level where they didn't expect us to be, let us play a trick and see how we can get more money. But also there are other issues around it, around the cranes. When you go beyond money, there have been rumors circulating on social media that actually the FIFA president was not in Cairo at the time the cranes were disqualified.
I've had that argument.
He was, apparently he was here in Kampala attending a housewarming of one artist. So you actually see a situation of disarray at a time when you are needed maybe to be with the boys.
Systems that he didn't need to be personally present for
well,
to continue performing well.
If some countries have had, if some countries have had their heads of state going to the camp,
the president of Madagascar is there.
Exactly,
and was seeing the team.
That shows you the significance of having a figurehead in the camp. I'm sure if Magogo was there, some things couldn't have happened. If I, the other narrative which people are saying that maybe he was part of the group. And on the Cranes coach leaving, well, when you go to such a tournament, it's both for the players and the coaches. It's time to expose yourself. That's when players get deals with maybe good clubs, they move on, they get transferred, and even the coaches do the same. You get a better offer, you move.
He's been frustrated by some of these things, and the things he hasn't told us. But Dr. Mariamos, you speak for government, and there is demonstration that the eyeballs that have been following the Uganda Cranes performance at the Africa Cup of Nations all over the world is immense. Why has your government perennially failed to systematically invest in sports?
Well, of course, there are many competing priorities, and our national resource is still small, so we try to cut it across to look at the other services. But progressively, we've been putting more money in the area of sports, and that's why even the president specifically created a full department headed by a minister so that we can focus on sports. And the performance of the Cranes reaching that level is not by accident. It is partly because of the investment that the government has put in, but definitely we need to put in more so that we can even reach greater heights. With respect to our performance in Egypt, I think first of all we should congratulate the Cranes that they managed to perform very well up to the level where they reached. But the incident of the money issues and the strike were quite unfortunate. I would have expected that even when there were those areas of discomfort, they should have been able to discuss them internally and resolve them without exposing themselves to the world, that you have internal challenges of money. And it's not yet clear whether it is the management of FIFA which was not being transparent, or, like Kenneth is saying, it is the players who wanted to demand more than what they had bargained before. But I hope the truth will come out.
But Dr. Mariamos, you have a full minister, your colleague, has been in that ministry like forever. We hosted him here some time back. And we're asking him the exact same questions. The Cranes return, you'll invite them, the president will invite them to State House to congratulate them on reaching this elimination round. The stage, the knockout stages. You'll have Parliament calling them to thank them. You'll have a session in Parliament, and someone is wondering,
which will be worthwhile, because
it would be worthwhile. Because you're coming in after they have achieved a certain level of success. And the question is, why would they have to pick that bonus money from a slush fund provided to the president from his donations budget instead of a well-structured funding process from the government of Uganda? What does the minister do? And someone like Anderson here said, we knew when we last qualified 2 years ago, we knew we had the capacity to send a team to compete at the Africa Cup of Nations. Now we qualify so long in advance, and there's no provision in the budget to say, no, what does this team actually want? What does this mean for this country that the Cranes has qualified? How can we leverage this qualification, both to market talent, but also to sell the country as a footballing nation, also to get people to mention Uganda and advertise at AFCON? Why does it happen? Why is it always last minute and or unstructured?
No, there was a budget for them. But definitely it is also proper that if the president can use his budget to supplement what they have been given, there is nothing wrong with that, because it's the same parliament which appropriates the budget for State House and the President's office. And the president has a donation budget which we pass as parliament. And it is to his discretion that he can look at key priority areas where he can put the donations. So if he puts some of the donations to sports, there is nothing wrong. But if you are right that we should put more money to sports as our budget, as our resource envelope improves. But we have been putting money, and if you check the progressive years, we have been increasing the money year by year.
Charles,
yes.
Where I disagree with the Honorable Minister, because by law, the President is the de facto Minister of Finance. And if actually sports is a priority, we shouldn't see the funding for the sports sector coming from a donation budget, which should be preserved for unfortunate circumstances. We know very well that there is a qualification campaign. For instance, there is a qualification campaign for the Cranes that is going to begin. We know, for instance, the She Cranes are going to be at the World Cup. We know this is going to happen. I'm sure there's a sports sector investment plan that is supposed to be funded by the budget. It takes into account all these realities. Now, what disturbs many people is when you see the last minute, the funds that are supposed to make the Cranes move forward coming from the president. Maybe that would be additional. Maybe the president can provide the funding. Maybe when the Cranes, like a reward, like maybe when the Cranes have performed very well, then the president will give a token. Ideally, that should be the idea behind a donation. Seriously, sports has become a very serious industry in the world. Most of the richest people we see in the world today are sportsmen. And I think Uganda has the potential, not only in football and in various sports disciplines, to be able to make a lot of gains. But I think we have sort of not paid close attention to what really needs to be done. Sports needs to be treated as a business and not just a competition. That's what I think.
I had a commentator give evaluation of the DR Congo team on the pitch. I think 14 million euros. I think about 14 million euros. If you have a Premier League team on the pitch, from the allowances that the players are paid, from the money they purchased them for, you can tell a team is worth so much, and money will follow. Why we always underinvest? Because I think even in athletics, including government officials, they wake up one day and say, hey, by the way, you mean a Ugandan is competing and has qualified for the final? There isn't a process. I'm wondering, Dictor, how this reliance on a presidential donation and some little money that goes into the ministry, a lot of it spent on administration, actually helps to tap talent, to groom talent, and to deliver it.
But I think you guys are letting the civil servants we put in charge of these things off the hook, and I don't think that's right. We have the National Council of Sports. Those people get some money. They have some resources. They are not using them. We don't know what they are using the resources they have for.
Dicta.
The token that Kenneth is talking about was actually a reward from the president because the Cranes had qualified for the African Cup of Nations. And actually that's what caused the problems, because FUFA then got the money that the president gave for. In Tanzania, for example, they got free land. So in Uganda, they got money. Then they got that money from the president. FUFA had also agreed, if you win, you get a certain amount of money. If you get a draw, you get a certain amount of money. What FUFA is accused of doing is to use the money that the president gave for as appreciation for the president from the president to pay the things FUFA had agreed
to meet its obligation.
To meet its obligation.
And claim that it had paid the allowance.
Yes. So the problem isn't, it's government, because we have a minister of sports who is not doing his work. We have a national council, because we've had these things where national council, people in charge of national council of sports, instead of taking care of sports, they are busy renting out stadiums, they are busy stealing some pieces of land and building malls, and so on. And so the problem of the government is at that level. It's not so much because the president, yes, but the president is a politician. They've gone to him, they've said we don't have this. He has money which sometimes he gives to people, like he just gives money. So even when people just go there, he gives money. So he does that. So the president is wrong at that level. But the biggest problem is lack of institutional follow-up. The National Council of Sports, FUFA, and the others are not doing their jobs, and that's because the Ministry of Sports is sleeping, or they just enjoy the perks of being taken to different places, and they just sleep and do nothing. Because what is Bakabulini doing?
What is Bakabulini doing? I should ask his colleague minister.
He's doing a lot of work, and that's why Uganda Cranes was able to reach Egypt. Yes. Yes.
Maybe just what I wanted to tell my sister Victor here.
To be fair to FUFA,
please.
To be fair to FUFA, I mean, the Uganda Cranes has had these games that they've had before the tournament. How can they, like the warm-ups? How can I call them?
Friendly games.
Friendly games. Sorry about friendly games. And these are very expensive ventures to carry out. They had a game against Ivory Coast, which we won. I think they were in a
camp in Dubai.
In Dubai, and that took some bit of money. So something has been done. I mean, in terms of investment, there's been some bit of investment that has been done in the area of sports.
By who?
Now,
the question is by who?
By the government.
Okay.
Definitely by the government. But now the question comes down to accountability within FUFA.
It's accountability.
Within FUFA, are the players getting the right amount of money? Are they getting their allowances on time? Are the coaches being paid? So those are areas that we need to.
I hear you guys, but I think it's beyond just accountability. The investment is minimal. The investment is haphazard. It's inadequate, even if you look at it whichever way. I am hearing, Honorable Minister, that actually whoever manages the Uganda Cranes, one did not expect that would go beyond the group stages. So attitude and having faith in ourselves, even when the players were demonstrating and their coach was committed, demonstrating that we have the potential, we have the capacity to go to the very highest level. The attitude of the people in Cairo and the people even here, said, we shall go there. We're just participating because we have arrived there. We have little faith in ourselves as a nation. And I think that's dangerous. And even from government, the expectation that we are going to step back and say, what does it mean that we qualified in 2017? What does that just mean? That the Uganda Cranes was able to qualify in 2017. Why had we failed before? If we qualify again for the 2019 tournament, what does this mean? How do we plan? How do we execute? Was absent. Dictor, I don't know if you're discussing it in the newsroom, where people are talking about booking tickets to return, booking hotels and tickets only up to 1st June, after 1st July, because we didn't expect ourselves to go anywhere beyond that, anyway. That everybody was taken by surprise that we're qualifying to the next stage. Why should we be taken by surprise that we're qualifying to the next stage? On a matter that is as serious as sports is these days in the world.
Yeah, but for a situation where you may or may not continue, also paying up front up to the end, supposing the hotel does not have a policy of refunding you. So I think there was no big...
the faith that we had in ourselves, Honorable Minister.
Yes, but I think also in the last so many years, we have given the sports a higher profile. That's why it can even get space to be discussed on this television talk show. Even when you look at the budget, yes, the budget may not be to the level where we all want it to be, but if you look at the last 5-10 years, especially when that department was created of sports with the minister and so forth, I recall we used to handle the budget in the parliament, the committee. The budget has been increasing. Yes, I agree there must be better accountability by FUFA, by government and so forth, but the government is committed to strengthening the sports in this country. And we have been putting money every year. We increase the amount of money allocated to sports. And that's why there is this visibility. That's why Uganda cranes are performing much better than in the past, and we are committed. As for the president supplementing the budget, there is nothing wrong
We may
with
not
that.
have a problem with that. When Kipsiro won an Olympic gold, we ran and decided to create a training camp in his home village. There was a struggle. I don't know how far that has gone. Systematic development and tapping of talent and directing it. When we know that in the world now, talent is one of the biggest is one of the biggest selling items. Where we can't compete in technology, talent would take us there. We are not doing that. We are under-investing in that.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, we are under-investing in that, if we're investing at all.
Well, we do. Speaking as a member of parliament,
Yes.
I see a lot of effort for this on the ground, in the schools, right now.
I want you to speak as a minister of government,
yes,
not just as a member of parliament, as a minister of government.
Yes.
Yes.
What I'm saying that now, speaking as a community person, I see also government reaching down and mobilizing the young people in the sports area. For instance, in schools, right now, the schools from all over the country are gathered in Soroti where they are having competitions. So it is not correct to say nothing is going on, or there are no efforts.
We are not saying nothing. We are saying too little is being done. And we shouldn't be satisfied with that too little. We are not. We shouldn't be satisfied with that too little. We need to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, we'll be talking about the Landlord and Tenants Bill 2018. We'll be right back. You're still watching the Fourth Estate, and we started the discussion with Uganda's performance at the Africa Cup of Nations finals in Egypt, Cairo. And congratulations, Uganda Cranes, because at least for once we're able to move beyond from the qualifying stages into the knockout stages at group of 16, where we're beaten and by Senegal, 1-0. I think the Uganda Cranes executed itself very well. Only if we had a little bit more faith in ourselves that we could actually go the way to the finals, like we did in 1978. I think it's a big disappointment for those who have been doing political commentary and saying because the Uganda Cranes went to the finals in 1978, a government fell and this one will fall. Now that we have stopped midway, I don't want that
move
meant.
to other things.
But let's discuss the Landlord and Tenants Bill 2018. This is an act to regulate the relationship of landlord and tenant, to reform and consolidate the law relating to the letting of premises, to provide for the responsibilities of landlords and tenants in relation to the letting of premises and for related matters. This bill is a bill that was presented by the Minister of Lands, Housing and Urban Development, and we have the Minister here. So I want to start with you, Honorable Minister. Parliament passed this bill.
Yes.
You've seen the controversy that has followed.
Yes.
I just want you to speak to that controversy for now, because people say this bill is killing the housing market.
Well, those comments they are raising, we have had them for the last many years as the Ministry of Lands, because the process of enacting this law started in 2012, and we have had wide consultations across the spectrum, the tenants, landlords, bankers, financial experts, since 2012. Today is 2019. And the few landlords who are raising those comments raised these issues. And many of the provisions we considered and adjusted the bill. But also we know that everywhere where this kind of legislation is done, there are always those arguments. So we're not surprised that these comments are coming up in the public.
They're saying you ignored them. When you consulted them, you listened, but you did not take in. You heard them, but you did not listen to them.
No. You see, the challenge with this kind of legislation is that you are trying to balance the interests of tenants and landlords. And you have to narrow the space so that you accommodate both sides. And it is not true that the bill is favoring tenants against landlords. When you read the bill, we basically provide for rights and obligations and responsibilities of both tenants and landlords. The challenge that some of the landlords have been used to this, if I can say for lack of a better word, maybe impunity. where some think that because I own the property, then I disregard the rights of a tenant. I can wake up at midnight and chase this tenant. I can come and enter into your premises at 2 a.m. because it is my house. But we're saying no, there must be a respectful relationship between a landlord and a tenant, because they both need each other to coexist. You can only become a landlord if your premises are occupied by a tenant. And even you can be a tenant if you have a landlord to provide you with a property. So what the law is trying to do is to create that relationship, which should be cordial, which should be mutual, which should be respectful. Yes, you own the property, but you must respect the tenant. You, the tenant, you are occupying somebody's premises, you must also respect the landlord. So basically the law is
It doesn't
around
come off
that.
as that. It comes off like a very populist
No.
piece of legislation that focuses on a majority who are tenants. And because I want to give context to this. Anybody renting commercial premises,
Yes.
especially in the upscale areas, tenancy agreements are clear. NTV wouldn't be in these Serena premises without a clear agreement with the owner of the conference center. And and the question is, so who are you legislating for, really? Yes, you had fights over Qualicel, for example. You have had fights over downtown properties. And then majority who are tenants, residential tenants, who rent Mizugo. That is where landlords walk in. Anytime they want to walk in, they find somebody cooking meat or on the sigiri, and they think, hey, so you have money to buy meat and you haven't paid my money. And it appears to some that these are the kinds of people you're trying to appeal to for purposes of votes, that you're actually not fixing the problem of relations between tenants and landlords.
No, this bill has little to do with our politics. Because the key question you should ask yourself, is there an issue with respect to the relationship between landlords and tenants in Uganda? To me, as a minister responsible for housing, and the minister who looks at the whole country, not Kampala alone, the answer is yes, there are issues. You find as we speak now, there are tenants who have probably defaulted for 6 months and they are attempting to run away from the houses.
Yes.
At this time, at midnight. You find there are also landlords who are trying to chase tenants from the houses at this time. So should we as a government just sit on and look at that and just keep quiet? The answer is no. Everywhere in the world, the relationship between landlords and tenants is regulated by the state. And there are many countries with these kinds of laws. So it's not true that it's only Uganda which has enacted this kind of legislation. So the key question should be whether the law is fair. Is it fair? Does it impinge on the rights of the landlords compared to tenants, or vice versa? And from our view as the Minister of Lands, we say we have tried to put in place a fair law which tries to balance. But of course sometimes people don't want to be regulated. People don't want to see new changes coming. But for us, we are satisfied that the law is fair. The landlords, we have met them several times before the bill was tabled in the cabinet. Even after cabinet, I had a meeting with the Prime Minister, with the landlords, with the tenants. Even when the bill was the Committee of Parliament, they appeared before the committee, submitted, and a number of their concerns were accommodated. But you cannot want all your views to be accommodated, because you must also look at the other side. So it is also not correct that because some of the few areas they were pushing were not maybe taken to their satisfaction, then you render the whole bill useless. No.
Do you think...
And I can say the few who are raising the comments are not the only landlords. Even on this table, I'm sure some of you are landlords.
You know, maybe all of us are tenants.
Or we are tenants and landlords at the same time. And I also do not think that they speak for all landlords in Uganda. So,
but do you think there's a problem as a minister in the Ministry of Lands, Housing and Urban Development that government has perennially failed to come up with comprehensive legislation regarding matters to do with land, because tenancy and property is also part of land? That there's no harmony between the laws and the policy And that causes persistent friction over the broader question, which is called land.
No, the government actually has done well on legislation to do with the land and properties. But of course we have, when it comes to land, we have like historical challenges which we inherited as a country, especially when it comes to mine land in the center of this country. But progressively, I think we have put in laws which have tried to cause stability, but the laws are never static. They can always be reviewed depending on what is trending and what is prevailing. So we have land laws. The constitution is very clear. You know, for instance, that President Idi Amin had nationalized the land in Uganda, and under the CA, land was returned to citizens. It is now held privately.
Some people think
And
that Amin is
progressive. That was a progressive decision by the Constituent Assembly.
some people think that Amin's decree on land was the most progressive that could have been made by any government. Some people think so.
Yeah, there are some people think so, but in the thinking of the NRM government, I think the thinking was no, land should be returned to private citizens. That's why in Article 26 and 273, the Constitution is clear that Ugandan citizens of Uganda have a right to own property.
But you've also been struggling with the compulsory acquisition of land.
Yes, no, the Constitution clearly provides for compulsory acquisition of land.
Yes.
And let me clarify, because when we brought an amendment in the Parliament, people misunderstood it that the government wants to introduce compulsory acquisition of land. It's already there in Article 26. Government is authorized by law to compulsorily acquire your land.
You know, I think people understood that there was compulsory acquisition of land.
Yes.
What they didn't understand is why government was keen to amend and create a similar provision that already existed.
Yeah, it was keen because the Constitution says citizens are allowed to own property. Two, government is authorized by law to compulsorily acquire that property for purposes of projects for public good, public works, roads, railway, hospital, public health, security, and so forth. But the Constitution says before a government acquires this land compulsorily, you, the owner of the property, must be compensated fairly and adequately, and the payment must be prompt. You should be paid prior to acquisition of this property. So the issue which government has faced is that when the chief government valuer assesses your property and says your land has been affected, from our assessment you will be paid 100 million shillings, and you say, no, this property is mine, in my view I should be paid 1 billion shillings. So there is a disagreement on the quantum to be paid, and then you go to court and you seek an injunction, and then you stop government, and you find for 10 years government can't construct a road or a railway line because of your personal interests. So the issue is, can't we have a way where government is enabled to do this road, and also you are enabled to seek court redress and you get the adequate compensation? So you get the adequate compensation, but also government is not unnecessarily stopped from doing this.
Honorable Minister, you don't create another law. You fix the problem, the system. You fix what is broken. You don't create another law.
No, you do.
No, if you think
what is
if the court is going to take a long time, you get the courts to work faster. You don't create another law.
Yes, but you do that by amending the law.
No,
to say, for instance,
you say courts are going to act promptly in addressing these matters. But let me bring my colleagues into this
by announcement on radio. You reform the law. You say, with respect to petitions on land like this, courts shall make a ruling within 3 months. That's the question of the law, amending the Constitution.
You're trampling over citizen rights over their property. You're actually contradicting the right to ownership of property. That's same Article 26.
No.
Let me bring in colleagues to discuss.
I wish you'd invite us again.
Yes, we'll have more
because
discussion.
We're coming back to Parliament with that
yes,
law.
I'm aware that
Yes.
there are moves to bring that amendment back into Parliament. But let me bring colleagues back into this discussion. Jeff, let me start with you. You since the last time we discussed this issue here, now you have you've had all those voices about the new bill that Parliament passed and the concerns of tenants. I don't know what from your desk, what it is you're hearing and what you're making of the bill now that we have had opportunity to read through it and understand a little bit more out of it.
No, I mean, Honorable Mario Musi has said that, you know, they had to look at the issues between the tenants and the landlords, and they thought that, and government thought that there was an issue there, and therefore there was a need for some bit of legislation. And for me, and I think that's looking at only one side of the story. I think the government has not seen, has not looked at the structure of the economy and how property, mostly commercial properties, come up in this market. So in a sense, I think government is putting the cart before the horse, because first of all, you have to understand how people come to put up these properties. They have to look for the financing from the bank. Most, actually 90% of the debt in this market, of the loans in this market, come from the commercial banks. Commercial banks get money from somewhere, foreign markets, in dollars, and then they sort of lend it in shillings to the local market, and people put up these properties. Now you're coming up and saying that, you know what, the landlords should not charge the tenants in dollars, because you think there's an issue there among the, on the currency. And right there for me is where I see a problem with government, is that government has not understood the structure, the financial structure of this economy, where money comes from and how it moves from the person who lends it to you, from the first person to the bank, and to the and then to the developers. And I think if government does not reconsider this bill, I see there's going to be a big problem in the property market. Dicta seems to seems to be seems to disagree with me.
I don't know that if we stop building malls, I don't think it will be a big deal. If we stop building office space, I don't think it will be a big deal. This is a market that's already glutted. So I think this bill has that the elite, this is some form of elite capture, that so the landlords can speak up, especially the ones downtown and even uptown can speak up. So that's what we are focusing on. But people actually are thrown out of houses and they have to sleep outside, or you have to go borrow money to go and rent when you had plans of how long you wanted to stay in the house, and you are actually meeting the payment schedule. So I am not sure that it's such a bad thing. If the malls, the whatever, these places are already, we don't need any more of them. I think government's problem here is, one, we have a national housing that builds houses for I don't know who. And by the way, those are some of the landlords that are complaining, because those are the houses that Knight Frank and the others control. So we have, government is trying to solve a problem that it will not solve it, but I don't think the problem is this law. I think the problem is how our housing...
My question actually would be, how, yes, we know the problems.
Yeah.
In the housing sector, we know the problems in the mortgage market, commercial interest rates, and mortgages that are very expensive. Those we know. My question is, how does a law like this fix that problem? And what does government need to do to comprehensively deal with this challenge? Because Jeff tells you, you're borrowing at commercial rates, 25%, 20% per annum to put up a property. Even before you complete the property, it's being advertised in the newspapers, because you failed to complete it, two, you failed to pay off your loan. Then you have tenants, and there are crooks on both sides, by the way.
Yeah, that's true.
There are landlords who are crooks, that they will receive money to say they are fixing certain things. They will never fix them. And then they turn around and throw the tenants out of their houses. But there are also tenants who are crooks. They sleep in one house, you only see them, the landlord never sees them. They arrive in the night, in the dead of the night, disappear early in the morning. You never see them. And you realize the problem does exist. My question is, does this law fix that problem? Or does it exacerbate it?
It does not.
Because the request for a tenancy agreement, for example, it kind of is intended to solve some of those problems. Maybe it could have been expanded to say it shows your credit history. We already have that information now that we have national IDs and so on and so forth. So maybe those are things that can be added and therefore improve the law, whether through regulations or whatever. But our biggest problem is, as African cities in general, we are growing the wrong way. We have a national housing, it gets money from donors and so on and so forth, goes builds houses that we then rent to tourists, Airbnb, who come in once in a while. Yet we have ordinary people expanding this city instead of growing it upwards, because there is no money to grow upwards. And I don't think the banks, as in their current form, I don't think that's a problem they can fix, because the interest rates are too high. You cannot expect to make money out of those. In fact, some landlords, the rich ones in this city, will tell you that if you are starting out, do not borrow money to go build a house that you will rent out, because you'll never make that money. It's rich people like Sudil who can afford, because they have their own money to build. If you're going to borrow money from a bank to build a house, don't do it, because the rents will be too high. You will not be able to afford it. Yes, Kenneth.
For me, I think real estate is a long-term investment. You can't invest in a house today and expect to recoup the money you invested in 6 months. That's not reality. It's a long-term project. It's an investment that you look up to for a period like 20 to 30 years. So for one to argue that they cannot recoup their money as in the shortest time possible, that's a fallacy. But there's some issues. The question,
Kenneth, there would be, where do you have that idle capital that you can put in property and recoup it? Actually, statistics reveal that on average, it will take you 10 years, between 8 to 10 years, to recover initial investment in a house. Whether you are renting that house out or you are sleeping in it, you're using it for yourself. It takes an average between 8 to 10 years. And I'll give you an example. If you spend 100 million shillings to build a house, and you get someone to rent it for 1 million shillings per month, which is unlikely that a house of 100 million shillings will be rented out for 1 million shillings per month. You will spend, you're recovering 12 million shillings per year. 12 million, you need about 8 years to recover 100 million.
Well, exactly. That's why I'm telling you that investing in real estate is a long-term project. It's not something that you should think about recouping immediately. It's an investment that can sustain you as you continue to collect from it. It's different from you having that particular 100 million kept on a bank account or in your pocket, and then in future there is nothing you can show for it. So people invest in real estate, people invest in accommodation. It's like a saving, something that you continue to collect from. But you ask some legitimate questions about whether this law will address some of the issues. Like you gave an example of landlords, of tenants who get up in the morning and disappear. I think there's somehow a remedy in this law. For instance, it introduces the tenant agreement, the tenants agreement, and even provides and the security deposit. Provides for the security deposit, but it also provides for a mechanism how such a tenant can be handled. For instance, you issue them a notice. It can be maybe even under the door. And once the notice to them to vacate the premises is not respected, you can move to the LOC, to the local councils, and report that tenant AB is in my house. He does not pay, and I've asked him to leave, and he doesn't. And I know the authorities have the power to come and break the padlock. I've seen this happening, where if you want to evict a tenant, you come with the authorities so that they can break the padlock and account for whatever is in the house. And it is registered, and then you can repossess your premises. So I think that is a plus. It does address some of the issues that are happening around. But also, what I also think on the side of the tenants, where it gives them some sort of relief, we have had a situation where landlords have a tendency of kicking out people after the initial 3 months. You know, when people are renting, they first pay for the first 3 months. So there are some tenants who actually use it as a tactic. Once the first 3 months have elapsed, because they are looking at the lump sum that you pay up front, they will start.
They get another person who pays another lump sum.
They will start doing what this law says, annoying the tenant, with an intention of having you exiting the place. So that a new tenant who again brings in that lump sum comes on board. So I think the law also addresses that issue. Now going to the issue of the dollar versus the shilling. For God's sake, the shilling is our currency, the one that we transact in, mainly the majority of Ugandans. We should respect it. If you go and deal in a dollar, you can convert it to a shilling.
Things of business are not about love. So this is
where I agree with the ministry. If you are going to charge rent in dollars, can't you convert it to shillings and tell the person that this is what I want you to pay? The person will look at the amount and say, okay, if this is what you're charging, I won't do it. I won't afford it, and the person will move away. But for them to argue that our shilling is weak, well, maybe there might be some dynamics in the market, and the shilling is actually weak. But we should not reach a level of saying I can't deal in a shilling because it's weak. We should actually have some level of patriotism and accept the shilling.
Yes, the minister.
But also, if I may just anchor my point, majority of the tenants in Kampala here are actually traders who actually go abroad and transact in dollars and different other currencies. But when they come back here to Uganda, they sell to us in shillings. Have you thought about the likely impact? Their paying rent in dollars has on the final price at which they sell a commodity to you as an ordinary Ugandan? There is an impact. In the long term, the law actually deals with the ordinary Ugandan by protecting them from a certain level of exploitation.
Yes, actually, countries everywhere protect and respect their sovereign currencies. And it is not true that we have not studied the economy and the macroeconomics and so forth in arriving at some of these provisions. And we have looked at the housing market, and it is not true that once the bill is enforced the way it is, that the economy will come down. Dollarization of rent is not necessarily a cure for the challenges of our economy. And when you go to other countries, some of us are very well traveled. The other day I was in Canada. I tried to buy something using the US dollar. I said, no, there's a Forex bureau there. Go and convert it and use the local currency. You just go to South Africa. Just go to Kenya and you try to pay in Uganda shillings. They will tell you go and convert it. So I think from a patriotic point of view, it is important that all of us should respect and try to protect our own Uganda shilling. And charging in dollars does not necessarily mean that you are strengthening the economy. And the argument that people who are investing in real estates are borrowing in the dollars is not strong enough. Because like Kenneth has said, these importers, they buy things from Dubai and they use the dirham. They go to China, they go everywhere, and they use foreign currencies. When you look at the products on the market like fuel, petroleum and diesel, we don't produce it here now. It comes from outside. We pay in dollars to get it into it. But reaching the market here, you pay in Uganda shillings. So the argument is, one, to respect our own Uganda shillings, but also for macroeconomic stability. We have to strengthen this Uganda shilling. Therefore, to us, we don't think that the argument that because the investors in real estates borrow money in dollars, you can convert into Uganda shillings. You can even fix your rent with a dollar in mind, but then convert it into shillings. Because we're not saying that government is fixing how much rent a tenant should pay. No, it's willing buyer, willing seller. If your mind is in dollars, you can still think in dollars, but then convert it to shillings, the tenant pays in shillings. What we are prohibiting is that you force a tenant here that I cannot accept Uganda shillings, you must put the money in the dollars. No. You can still receive dollars, but you could still say, my house goes for 3 million shillings, go and convert it, but we don't want to put in the law. The operating currency is Uganda shillings.
Mm.
There are forex bureaus.
I think
There are
that
forex bureaus
provision
everywhere. You
does-
can go the forex bureau and convert your money.
that
and get
provision
your
does
dollars.
make sense.
Yes.
You cannot be anywhere in the United States and walk into a shop or any place and think that because the pound sterling is a strong currency, you can transact
Or
with
the
pound
euro.
or the euro. They will not allow you to do that.
They will not
And I hear that I think South Africa has one of the most rigorous
yes.
policies to protect the rand.
The rand, yes.
It's yes, you talked about Kenya. If you dropped 5,000 shillings, Uganda shillings, on a street in Kenya, no one will bend
one
down
will
to pick
pick
it up. They will let it lie there.
So
there
why
is-
should
there is some
Ugandans be
validity-
proud
there is
of
some
a weakening
validity there, but
shilling?
you see, if you go to commercial banks where these people are borrowing money from, there is a rate for borrowing in dollars. There is a rate for borrowing in Uganda shillings. The rate for borrowing in dollars is quite stable. The one for Uganda shillings is highly volatile. How do you fix that? Because my thinking was, and these are my three questions to you that will take us to the next discussion. Number one, how do you fix the housing problem that exists in this country? 1.7 million housing units required. This number grows by 600,000 per year. How are you fixing that? And Dictor was very strong here talking about the place of companies, former government parastatals like National Housing and Construction Company. By the way, Dictor, National Housing and Construction Company is majority owned by Libya, I think.
Yeah,
No.
but
They exited also.
They existed. They also
It's not
existed.
It's
So
not
it came back
100%.
Uganda's
100%.
51%, but we are
51% you're taking
They're
back. the whole
exiting.
thing.
Going away.
They exited.
Okay. That's number one. How do you fix that problem broadly? Number two, you have I think I lost my train of thought a little bit on that. Let's first deal with that problem. How do you deal with the housing deficit by laws like this?
Yes. First of all, the first question on the Uganda shilling is that the solution is to strengthen the Uganda shillings, and strengthening it doesn't require glorifying the dollar. I think we should invest in strengthening our own shilling as we build our own capacity. So we think this move helps us toward strengthening the shilling rather than just glorifying the dollar and all of us think in terms of dollars. Yes, there is a huge housing deficit in Uganda, especially in urban areas like Kampala and the other municipalities. And we have developed a housing policy whose major theme is to ensure that Ugandans have access to affordable and decent housing. And there are a number of strategies which we have put in place. One of the challenges that we have, like you correctly said, is that the housing finance is quite expensive. When you go to borrow from the commercial banks, the mortgage interest rates are in the ranges of 17, 18, 20%. And we are trying to get money from some of the partners and build what we call a mortgage liquidity facility, where we shall have money available for purposes of borrowing for investment in real estates, which will be borrowed at a lower interest rate than what obtains in the market, probably 8 to 12% and not a 20%.
Honorable Minister, before you move away from that,
Yes.
there was that project much talked about. I think it has been launched and relaunched and relaunched. OPEC Prime,
Nakawa project.
Nakawa Naguru Housing Estate.
Now you're also diverting my thoughts. Yes.
Nakawa Naguru Housing Estate. Isn't that a colossal failure of government, especially fixing the housing problem in urban areas? And I'm still thinking about the tenants who used to occupy those properties. What you promised them, you evicted them, and they have been waiting. It's now how many years?
2013 or 12, 13 I believe.
No, before then. That debate started, I think, around
It's
That's
about
when they launched.
Close 10 years, close 10
The
years.
launch was around 2012 or 13.
Now you
Launch
have
of
diverted
OPEC.
me to Naguru. Okay, first of all,
We were still talking about
Yes.
the liquidity
Yes, yes.
fund.
yes, we are trying to get money which we can put into our economy to address the issue of mortgage finance so that we can get mortgages at a lower interest rate than what obtains today, because it's quite expensive. Secondly, when you look at the housing policy, is that most of the houses are not built by government. Ours is to put in place a conducive environment to enable investors put up houses for Ugandans. Yes, we have the National Housing and Construction Company, where government has majority shareholders, but the Libyans are also exiting so that we own it 100%. And they have been putting up houses. These flats you see, Bugorobi, Wandegaya, which
They've done a fair job at that.
Naria and so forth,
No,
which
they-
they sell to the public. But also, you realize there are many investors who have come in to invest in the housing industry. And actually, the housing and the construction industry is one of the booming parts of the economy. And there are other measures which we are putting in place. For instance, we are now discussing internally in the government to see whether we can reduce the taxes on some of the construction materials, cement, roofing materials, and many others, to see that these come down. And many others, I could go on and go on. But coming to the issue of Naguru housing estate, this is the land which belongs to government, where we had flats with tenants, and some of the flats were already condemned. They were old and condemned. So government had secured an investor where an MOU was signed between the government and this investor to put up modern housing infrastructure. But later on it turned out that this investor could not raise the appropriate amounts of money, and he actually
As
failed.
usual.
The investor only had an address.
As usual.
Resources.
Then I
As
think
usual. Those are
due
your
diligence was not
investors.
properly done.
Honorable Minister,
in the middle of the
I
project.
think there was no such an investor. This was just a conduit for some people to get their
No,
hands
there were
on that piece
Ugandans
of
who were
land.
based in the UK, and they came. There was a company based in the UK, so they
Called
came,
OPEC Prime.
OPEC Prime. So they came and formed OPEC Uganda.
Yes.
But I think OPEC Uganda at some point got challenges with the mother company in the UK, and they couldn't agree. So what the government has done,
Minister,
what
OPEC
the
Prime,
government,
OPEC
yes,
Prime
yes,
had its issues. Both the mother OPEC Prime and OPEC Prime Uganda
yes.
had its
Charles,
massive
the
issues.
facts are-
And the plots in Nakawa Naguru, we are told have been disappearing.
Charles,
they are there.
Progressive.
Charles,
I can just
honestly-
tell you what has happened.
Yes.
Is that eventually this investor could not meet his part of the bargain, and the government decided to terminate this engagement.
Charles,
And we have
What
taken
is the
back the
status
land.
now? You've taken it back.
Taken back the land.
There's some
The
houses.
tenants.
There's some houses that were built opposite the police headquarters. The Naguru police.
residential houses
Residential
that are
houses.
coming
Who
up.
owns those? Those are coming up.
Yes, they are private. That's how actually the investor also
Charles,
turned away from the MOU and allowed some people to build, not according to the plan.
Charles,
Those should
Can
have
you
been
finish
set
back
out.
this?
So the tenants who were there will be paid some ex gratia
oh dear.
compensation.
Of Ugandan's money. Wow.
Yes, ex
Charles,
gratia,
Charles,
because
Charles,
the MOU
Charles.
said upon completion
They will take.
of the flats, they will have the first call on buying the new houses. But since this didn't happen, that created some interest on their part. That's why the government is giving them some ex gratia payment, because the land wasn't theirs, the houses weren't theirs.
Honourable Minister,
But they're giving them ex
I
gratia.
honestly hope.
So we are going to get a new investor.
Charles,
So,
who is
and
going
the
to
other
put-
houses?
Yes.
The other houses that are on that land, the ones that have come up?
Those ones, the government is handling it with the proprietors.
How? Why not just, because they...
Why not just
why
tell
not
them to
just
disappear?
raise them unless
Because you don't
guys
have a,
know
you don't
who
have
is
an
there.
MOU with them.
Because you
have an
don't
own-
know them.
You have an MOU.
No,
You
no.
agreed on to some. You agreed to something. It hasn't been done. So why are you allowing those people to build those houses?
You can give advice, but I can
Charles,
tell you
let me
that
tell
we
you-
have put in
Charles,
place a
let me
committee
tell
of
you
the
what-
cabinet which is handling the matter.
Charles, let me tell you
And
what happens.
The committee is engaging those people, and finally we shall have it resolved.
Charles, let me tell-
But the
Charles,
last part here, we have now
Can you pack your
recovered.
throat kindly?
we have recovered the land. It is now in the hands of government, and we shall source for a new investor who is going to put modern.
Honourable Minister, as we take this break, I hope you're ready for the kind of headline that and a follow-up that will come with one, the ex gratia payment, and to the owners of those properties. Lying in your ministry, you should brace yourself for this, because
No. We are very open. I am talking
as-
with the
as-
television.
as-
I'm talking with the national television.
yes,
This is the secret.
as
Yes.
scandals blow, this looks like one potential one that will. I mean,
No.
the continuation of this saga.
There is no scandal.
Of, Nakawa
The
Naguru.
only issue is that the investor who came didn't have the capacity to do what he had promised to do. Full stop.
And
Other than that, there is no other scandal.
That's the surprise of many people who followed this story, because
Yes.
everybody did their, they checked out this investor and warned even before the MOU was signed. Why government went ahead to sign that MOU is what is a mystery to to many people.
Yes, but there isn't much that the government has lost in this, because we have recovered the land. It's back to the hands of government, and we shall get another investor who will develop that.
We have lost the time element.
Let's pick this discussion up after a very short commercial break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. This last segment of the Fourth Estate, and we're discussing the landlord-tenant bill that was passed by Parliament. Honourable Minister, do you have an idea when the President might assent to this?
Well, you see, when Parliament passes a bill, then the clerk, the office of the clerk, has to compile it. Because also the people who are commentating in public, a number of them do not know what Parliament passed. Well, there were amendments which were made on the law, and for instance, we had initially proposed to repeal the Distress for Rent Act, but upon advice from Uganda Law Reform Commission, which did an assessment, we reinstated that law, which is one of the remedies that a landlord has. If a tenant is not paying the rent, under that law, you can go and confiscate the property of the tenant, and then you appoint bailiffs who can, after some time,
Auction.
Yes. All those remedies are there. But I see landlords making a claim that they have no remedies how they can actually secure their rent from the tenants. We have defined the court, for instance, to include the LOC courts. So you can run it to LOC courts, because one of the issues was the courts are quite bureaucratic. They take long to make judgments and rulings. But you can go to LOC courts. So there are many amendments which we
before
put,
we leave this,
which are
explain
very
the
fair.
6 months, the 6 months notice to a tenant before they can exit the house.
The import of that provision is that if I want you to leave, if I want to terminate the tenancy, I'm a landlord, I should notify you that prepare to leave my building within this period of time. This is trying to cure a situation where somebody wakes up and in the morning he's telling you, today you have to leave my house. You see, you have rented these premises, probably they are for commercial purposes, you have invested in money, you put a lot of money, somebody says, today you must leave. Is it really fair? We are saying, give the tenant a notice so that he also prepares. He looks for new premises, and we are saying that even when you give a notice, all those months, the tenant has to pay. We are even saying, because there was also a complaint that if a tenant is refusing to leave premises and you go to court, some people misinterpreted it to mean that the period when you are in court before he is evicted, that he will not pay for rent. For any single moment the tenant is in your house, he has to pay until when he leaves the house. So that 6 months issue that the landlord should give a notice to the tenant and facilitate the tenant to prepare to exit the premises. But not
but
just
6 months is a long time, Honourable Minister. You provide for the landlord not annoying the tenant. You don't provide for the tenant annoying the landlord in the same law. Annoyance.
No.
Yes.
First of all, in reality, there are a few situations where the tenant will annoy a landlord. It's usually the other way. It's usually the landlord who interrupts the quiet enjoyment of the premises by the tenant. But we have also provided that the tenant, once he or she is occupying premises, should not be a nuisance, especially to the neighbors. For instance, I am renting this house, you live in the next door, and then every night I'm playing loud music. Or I convert these residential premises into a prayer place where we are shouting the whole night. We have provided for all those. So even a tenant is prohibited from becoming a nuisance in the premises where he or she is occupying. So the law is fairly balanced. So what I encourage the landlords and other Ugandans is to read the law, especially after it has been assented to understand what provisions were passed by Parliament. I think many are arguing from a point of the old version of the law yet has been improved.
Okay, Ivan Okuda is watching us from Johannesburg, South Africa, and he's asking you to comment about the 10%
Yes,
cap
the 10%,
on
yes.
rental increment, and his context. He's giving context to his argument here. One, you have the central bank rate
Yes.
that's above. You have bank interest rates that are above this cap that you're putting. What's the thinking?
Yes. Everywhere the rental markets are regulated, and what we have provided here is that a landlord shall not be allowed to increase rent by more than 10% in a year. Because you get situations where somebody wakes up because he has personal problems, he just increases rent by 300%. You've been paying 500,000, so now I need 2 million shillings, with no scientific reason as to why or how he has arrived at the 200.
But we're operating a free market economy, Honorable Minister.
Yes.
And the free market economy suggests that the market dictates how it moves.
No.
It dictates it.
We are also studying the economy.
With some
We do not-
regulation, though.
Yes, with some regulation. We also don't want an artificial market to be created, an artificial housing market has to be regulated. So the 10%, mainly we use inflation. And for the many years behind us, the inflation rate has remained single digit. It has not gone beyond 10%. Actually, in most countries, when you look at their laws, they don't, like say in Germany, okay, Germany, the condition is different from here, but in their law, you don't increase rent beyond 4% in 4 years. When you look at most of the Arab countries, even Asian countries, they also have 4%. But for us, we stretched it to 10% because of our own economy, but the main determining factor is the inflation rate, which has not gone beyond 10%. But also we put a provision, should there be changes in the economy, the minister is authorized through a statutory instrument to review this percentage with the approval of Parliament. So it is not the static.
Victor, you've been itching to interject.
No, I was just going to say that 10% I think is fair, because what Ivan is saying about the central bank rate, the central bank is not going to increase their rate by 10% in 1 month. So it's not a problem. The central bank usually does 1 or 2% changes unless there is a significant problem in the economy. So that 10% fits in that. Even the interest rates, even when they swing, they cannot swing by 10% unless it's 2011 when we had significant problems. But again, it cannot swing by that percentage. That percentage is quite high. But for me, I think all those do not fix the problems we have. We have a city that is growing. It's growing outwards too much. In the center, in Kololo, in Nakasero, in all those places, we have empty buildings.
Empty lots, yes,
Yeah,
and rotten buildings.
Yeah, no, not even just rotting ones. We have crested towers down
buildings
here.
that don't have tenants.
Yes, we
in them.
have crested this hill below us. It's almost all empty. And now what the government is doing is solving a problem slightly, but people are going outside of the city. We are increasing traffic jams. We are increasingly spending more in repairing roads, building new roads. The problem is we are not building houses for people to go in, and because the minister was talking about national housing. National housing gets money from donors, from the African Development Bank and others, but they still build.
Actually, they borrow.
They borrow, but the interest rates they get are much lower than the commercial rates you're talking about. But they still build houses that cost the same as private developers who get money from the banks. How do you explain that to us? It means national housing is either, I don't know what's going on, but they can't be doing the right thing if they cannot deliver at a rate, because Sudil will build a house and national housing will build it at the same rate. How do you explain that? The national housing has a problem, and also housing finance. They've been in this market as a bank. How is it possible that they are unable to get money? Because I can understand Stanbic has shareholders that they have to account to. But what is national housing doing? Housing finance doing that they cannot get money from? And because the problem is, I build my own small house, Then someone else goes builds their own. In the meantime, the city is expanding. Government has to then invest in roads to reach those people. Has to invest in water. When if you had buildings,
and
if
you
you
can't
had
have planned development.
if you had houses coming up, then I live in that same flat. Someone else lives above me, and so on and so forth. The problem is, this law won't fix the problems we have. It will alleviate some, but it won't fix the problems we have, because the problems we have lie elsewhere in my view.
Yes.
Let me just add
Yes.
context to what she's talking about. If you have raised buildings, you have one central sewer system instead of multiple. I think it's Honorable Margaret Mahanga who once said we live like in on one big septic tank, because everybody is building their own septic tank here. So Dicta builds here, builds a septic tank on this side. Jeff builds on this other side. Kenneth Rukwago builds another one on the other corner. Dr. Marimus builds in this corner, and Charles builds on this corner. So you have septic tanks all over the place in an area. You don't have centralized facilities because everybody is building their own little thing. You do not have, you cannot even pull resources for security because everyone has to put a guard. Yeah. Which are the problems that organizations like, or institutions like National Housing would have been fixing. And there was expected to be that National Housing and Construction Corporation works in close collaboration with Housing Finance Bank to ease access to mortgages, access to money, and access to actually built houses. Where that failed, I do not know, because I don't think those institutions work for the ordinary Muntu as they say.
Well, we are trying to re-engineer the whole housing industry. The housing construction company, the National Housing and Construction Company, also actually borrows from the commercial banks here.
It's not true.
I'm telling you as the Minister for Housing.
And
Yes,
I've
you are saying it's
covered
not true.
I've covered several events
I am
where
telling
they
you
are
that
getting
they used to
money
get
from
money
donors.
from Shelter Afrique, which is the African Housing Bank, which has had challenges, and they have not been getting money from there. So they have loans from Centenary Bank, from Southern Chartered Bank, and partly that explains why their houses are expensive.
And the National Social Security Fund is one of the major shareholders. Isn't
Yes.
it?
NSSF plus Housing Finance Bank.
Yes.
And then the government. So one of their problems has been that they borrow also from the commercial banks. And of course the interest rate is high, so that is also plowed into the price of the house. But we have studied why the prices of houses in Kampala are high, and we are trying to address them. One of the reasons why the prices are high for national housing and even the other housing estates is that they tell you that up to 30 to 50% of the money they charge is because of the expenditures they incur on the amenities, extending electricity, extending a Tamaka road to the housing units, internet, sewerage services like we are saying, and water service and so forth. We have now come to collaborate with these real estate investors that the government shall be extending some of these services to the housing estates, and this will drastically cut the cost of the house by about 30%.
Honourable Minister, sorry, I know we have little time to get out of here, but sorry for this interjection.
Yes.
If you are Arkwright, your Jomai, your Hosanna, whatever name is provided, doesn't commercial sense, business sense, dictate that it would be the interest of Umeme, for example, to deliver distribution lines into a housing estate once it has been earmarked and developed and approved by government? Wouldn't it make natural sense that it would be in the interest of National Water and Housing Corporation, National Water and Sewerage Corporation, to extend water and sewage services to these new potential clients? Does it require government to come in and put in more money?
Of course, it makes sense, like you are saying.
Yes.
But what has been happening in the past is that these investors have been putting in money to pull these services to the real
So
estates.
whose job
So we
is
have
it?
had a discussion now to ensure that the National Water, Umeme...
Whose
and
job
all
is
this-
it that in government to say, wait, you National Water and under the Ministry of Water, that there's an estate coming up here, this is what it looks like, you have so many potential clients, why don't you extend water? And then you maybe, there are things like the Presidential Investor Roundtable, there are ministries that talk to each other. I'm wondering where those discussions, if they don't happen in cabinet, where do they happen?
That's why I'm telling you that we have now addressed some of those issues. And that was one of the reasons why the pricing for the houses was quite high. But also the other issue with national housing, which I've discussed with them, with that they target the high-end tenants or elites who can buy their houses. And we have agreed that they should also build for the middle level, say the graduates who are coming out of university, people who are getting employed for the first time, those who can pay rent or buy a house of 100 million, 80 million. So they look at the market within Kampala and beyond. But they have been building houses of 300 million, 400 million, 500 million, which most of the middle level people may not be able to afford.
I don't know where we belong. All of us seated here.
Yes.
I would think would be, for the period of time we have been working, for the kind of work that we do, would be a target of some of this. Of this. I don't think any of us here qualifies for the kind of rates that national housing is offering. I don't know.
No,
because whether you're borrowing from the bank,
as long as we restructure the mortgage industry.
Okay.
Actually, many people everywhere, you don't have to pay full amount of money to buy a house. But you get a mortgage and pay over a period of 20, 30 years. Okay. That's how people are able to hold homes.
I'm being warned by
which is the area which we are working on.
That we're running short of time. I need us to end this discussion altogether, actually. We haven't even discussed UTL. So, Jeff, come in briefly, and anybody who has a comment, and we'll give the opportunity to the Minister, and then we'll make just one final comment on UTL, but we'll discuss it. Yes, for me, I have 5 minutes.
For me, just briefly, I mean, I have to comment, you know, I feel sorry for Honorable Baryomunsi. I think it must be very difficult working for this government because really, I mean, you know the problem, you know the solutions, but you tend to do totally the wrong thing. I mean, he's just been talking about national housing, building high-end houses. It's like they did not know. Like you wake up one morning and you're like, hey, by the way, there's no market for these houses. They're building for the high end. To solve this whole issue of the tenant, the landlord, and the whole structure of the economy, we need to have enablers in place to allow investment in this area. We need to deal with issues of bureaucracy, too much paperwork, go to KCC, get a plan, go to national water, you know, getting all the things, it has to be fast. We need to solve issues like in the land registry. Land titles, you know, all these complaints about you're building in my spot, you're building in the other person's spot, need to be solved. Financing, we need to create a huge saving culture so that banks don't borrow in dollars, so that they can borrow in shillings and lend out in shillings to solve that issue. Borrowing, government needs to stop borrowing. You know, whenever GDP to the debt to GDP is about 42%. You know, government is borrowing heavily. They are crowding out the local market that can actually borrow in shillings and put up
decent
houses. You need to promote issues like the capital markets. You know, you need to create another avenue where you can get financing other than the banks, so that people can be able to put up all these commercial properties cheaply. And then, of course, you need to create an environment where you deal with corruption. These are some of the solutions that government knows that they know they need to do them, but they refuse to do them, and they end up putting issues like these laws, and they tell you, you know what, there is the law, now solve, you know, I mean, deal with it. Sort your issues. For us, for you a law, but nothing like an enabling environment.
I'm being told I have 3 minutes. So Victor, okay.
Well, Charles, one other interesting aspect that maybe the ministry that Dr. Baryomus here represents, the Honorable Minister, is the fate of the government workers, health workers, teachers, who do not have decent accommodation. Ideally, one would think an entity like national housing should actually be helping such people to build such houses. But also, the other challenge that government is going to have is in terms of identifying land, because most of the government land is actually being grabbed by the same people who are in government. So it becomes even a bigger problem. Where will government be getting the land to be able to set up this kind of houses that we are talking about? So generally, it is something that is. So there's a lot of confusion, not only in the real estate sector, but also from the policy angle of it. we seem not to be doing enough to actually deal with the deficit of decent accommodation that we have in the country. The ministry talks about a good policy, but that policy remains unfunded. Like Dictor here was saying, even national housing is borrowing. So the pace at which they are working, even the kind of houses they are putting up, they're too expensive for a common person in Uganda. So I don't think we'll be able to deal with this problem.
So, Honorable Minister, you have a cocktail of issues to deal with.
No, but the national housing is a business organization.
Yes.
It's not a government entity to build the free houses. They build and sell.
They should be able to build and
Although
sell
we are
at
now
a
trying to
cheaper
restructure
cost.
it and see whether we can capitalize it and turn it into a real housing and construction company to do even beyond houses, to do
But
roads.
Honorable Minister, you
and other
agree
areas.
that the idea was
Yes,
to fix those gaps within the housing sector
yes.
that remain. And your biggest problem is not high-end housing. Everybody has talked about it here. It is that middle-level, low-level income houses. Because you want to be in a position where you eliminate slums. You want to be in a position where people who come out of university, who have some education, who have a fair, decent job, also live in a decent place. And if there is no government entity, if the government entity is going to operate like every L&B,
Airbnb.
no, not Airbnb, L&B real estate company, Johnson and Johnson real estate company, you have a problem.
No, this, like I said earlier on, the thrust of the housing industry in Uganda is private sector led. Generally, the government is not in the business of building houses. So most of the houses are done by the private sector. So you should not look at national housing as if it is the solution for the housing challenges of Uganda. No. Yes, they also contribute the housing stock, but they are a business element. Actually, the government doesn't put any single shilling in national
But
housing.
you do admit that is a problem. That is a mistake. Because housing should also be looked at the angle of social service.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So you cannot
It's a human right, actually.
For me,
Yes.
I'm afraid we can't reopen the discussion. We need to end this. So we allow the minister to conclude. Honorable Minister, just conclude. Make one comment. Jeff listed the litany of things that are uncoordinated.
Well,
Uganda Revenue Authority has also been coming after this rental tax
yes.
as a bigger problem.
And there is also property tax in
Yes, there's also
KCCA.
property tax of KCCA.
Yes, of course.
How do you tie up all these things?
What Jeff was raising is more of a textbook really issues. When you say government should stop borrowing, what do you mean? We have a budget which we have to execute, and borrowing per se is not a problem.
No, I think
Jeff
it's
is actually
borrowing
saying
from the
government should
domestic-
stop borrowing from the domestic market
markets is
because
a
it is
problem.
out competing
Yeah, it's a problem.
Private
That's a
sector.
problem.
the people, who- the
Okay, yes, but
private sector.
governments everywhere borrow. What is important? Are we able to pay back what we borrow?
I don't think that's the most important thing, Honourable Minister. The cost of money in the Ugandan economy becomes high because the commercial banks
Yeah.
are feeling
They-
comfortable to borrow to government than
To
to
lend
borrow
to
to the private
government.
sector.
To government,
to
Yes,
Yeah.
that's a
government.
challenge which we should address. But also the point I was making that when we pass the budget, if we can't collect enough taxes to execute this budget, we have to get extra funds through borrowing, locally
agreed.
and also internationally. But I get your point that we should reduce the domestic borrowing
You should also
to
fight
address
corruption.
the macroeconomic issues.
Okay.
But definitely borrowing is part and parcel of running governments everywhere, even America, even China, all governments borrow, provided you are able to pay back, and then you invest this money wisely. But as I conclude on the bill, like I said from the beginning, is that this bill is a balanced bill in our view, because it addresses the concerns of tenants, it also addresses the concerns of the landlords. The landlords, the few who are complaining, who are raising issues, should not really fear that this law is intended to subdue them, or that they will actually that the law will make them run out of business. Like the issue of dollars, I don't think it will negatively affect the housing industry or the investment in housing. The cap on how much you can increase rent in a year,
10%.
this is the practice everywhere where these relationships
Thank you.
are regulated. So let them really feel comforted. The president, my advice is that he should assent to the bill Yes, but also they can appeal to the president. There is also that avenue for the president to return particular provisions if he wishes, and then the parliament can reconsider. By the end of the day, we shall eventually pass this law.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. I'll just take two messages from Jose Nuabine. I believe Jose is in Kabulari and Tonde. He says we shouldn't exonerate the players. He's talking about the first topic we discussed.
Yes.
They behaved reprehensively in full view of the entire world. They shouldn't have gone bare knuckles. They somewhat marketed and ashamed our country in equal measure. What better allowances have these players ever received for them to complain of not being catered for? I also received a message from Davis Ramhumbu. Davis, I believe, is in Fort Portal, and he's talking about the leadership at FUFA. He has fairly hard words here for FUFA President Moses Magogo, who he claims left the team to come and attend a social event in Kampala, a housewarming party, and he says the guy has quite enjoyed the Farm Foundation led by Lawrence Mulindwa, but he's so excited and has silenced all opposition at FUFA with threats and bribes. He's untouchable, and he thinks he should resign. These are the views of Davis from Humbo. We are unable to discuss UTL. It's still a story that's growing. We'll internalize it more and possibly discuss it next Sunday. So I'd like to thank you very much, Honorable Minister Dr. Chris Bariomosi, for making time for the show.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kenneth Anderson Lukwago, for making time for the show.
Thank you for inviting
Thank
me.
you very much, Dictor Asimo, for making time for the show. And thank you very much, Jeff Mbanga. Thank you very much to you all, our viewers, for joining us tonight and always, and especially those of you who give us feedback. The debate on these issues continues on our social media platforms, and thank you very much to the production crew that stays up late to deliver the show to you. From me, it's a good night.